Wow, big story. You know who she is, the former ISIS bride Shamima Begum. She's been in the headlines again after a BBC documentary about her life was aired this week. She was 15 when she left the UK to join the Islamic State. She's a refugee at a camp in northern Syria. She's been stripped of her British citizenship on national security grounds. She's challenging that decision, but should she be allowed to return to the UK to argue her case? Joining me now to discuss this is the political commentator Emma Webb, and I'm joined by Refugee and Asylum's Right Director at Amnesty International, Steve Valdez-Symonds. Emma, let's start with you. I know lots of people have said they're going to cancel their BBC licence fee in protest of the 90-minute documentary, which also followed, I think it was a 10-part podcast about this woman.
The reason why people are angry at what the BBC has done in choosing to frame this podcast series and documentary the way they have, and also similarly towards Times Magazine for basically making Begum into a cover girl, is that there are many victims of Islamic State, Yazidis, people who were the victims of the state that Shamima Begum chose to go and be a part of. She chose to go and be part of that state-building enterprise. And she's being presented here as a victim. We're being asked to sympathise with her. And it seems to be as if it's part of some kind of PR campaign to make the public softer to the prospect of her coming back here, despite the fact that although we don't have all the information, we know that the government and the Home Secretary, particularly Sajid Javid, believe that there's sufficient evidence to suggest that she would pose a security risk to us here. So I think the public feel as if they are being asked to sympathise with somebody who isn't the victim and to put themselves in a situation that would frankly be dangerous.
Steve Valdez-Symonds, how do you argue against that? If the government's security advisors say she is potentially a security risk, how can we possibly let her back in the country?
Because she's British. We all know that. She was born here, born a British citizen, grew up here, lured to Syria from here, indeed by, it seems, an agent of an ally of this country. The fact is that whether she is dangerous or not, she may be, I do not know. Whether she has committed offences that should be prosecuted or not, that may well be the case. All of those things are matters that this country is responsible for, in the sense that she is British, and therefore we should deal with that. We should not be in the business of exiling our nationals to other parts of the world. We should take responsibility and deal with any issues that there may be concerning that, as we would do with any other British citizen.
She committed the crimes in Syria. Why doesn't she stay there and face Syrian justice? The issue is that she has been stripped of her British citizenship. There are real questions about the capacity of Syria to deliver justice for a whole host of reasons, which I'm sure are manifest. But it's certainly true that if British nationals commit offences in other countries, we have provisions for extraditing them under powers to those places if justice can be and should be delivered there. But what has happened here is our country has exiled one of its citizens by stripping her of citizenship. Also, by the way, as the Supreme Court held only a couple of years ago, effectively disabling her from being able to argue effectively her case about her nationality rights in front of a British court. That is the issue in question here. Emma Webb, how do you respond to that?
The British government have a primary responsibility to the safety of the British people. And this is a woman who, even if she's 15, she's still a moral agent. She chose actively to go and join a terrorist organisation. I don't believe for a second what she suggested in the documentary that she wasn't aware of the crimes of Islamic State. She chose to close her ears to them. I'm sorry, but the view I think of myself and the majority of the British public will be that actions have consequences. And the fact is that when foreign fighters do return to the UK, it's extremely difficult to prosecute them. It's particularly difficult to prosecute female fighters or women who have gone to join Islamic State, particularly in hindsight, because it's very difficult to collect evidence from a war zone. So the chances of her actually seeing justice if she comes back to this country are slim to none. So I think that fundamentally, you're talking about responsibility here. We have to be pragmatic. If we can ever stop a terrorist or a foreign fighter from returning to this country, which we can do legally if someone has dual citizenship, as was the case with the dual citizen Jack Letts, who had Canadian citizenship as well, and he was stripped of his citizenship. If we have the ability to prevent somebody who is potentially dangerous from coming back to this country, and we have no idea what the nature of the security risk is, the primary responsibility of the British government is to the safety of its people.
And Steve Valdez-Symonds, if she comes back here and she's put in prison to await trial, how do we know she's not going to radicalise people in prison? Because we know people have been radicalised in prison.
Well, to be clear, I am not saying that I do know what would happen in that regard. Although,
but aren't you worried about that?
I would assume. Well, please let me answer your question. I think all of the questions about issues of safety in relation to this British person are on their face real and need to be addressed. What I find so irresponsible, if we're going to use those terms, is the idea that this country thinks that it can divest itself of its responsibility for its own citizens, as if we would be, I don't know, would we be accepting of other countries exiling people to our territory because they were said to be a threat to their own state? It makes no sense whatsoever. This is a British person, and we should take our responsibilities in respect of our citizen. And if that involves the need to prosecute or consider security measures in respect of her, I do not know whether that is needed or not. But if it is, then that is something that we as a country should do.
All right, that's Emma Webb, and that was Steve Valdez-Symonds from Amnesty International UK.